The rain hammered against the tin roof of Daniel Carter's garage the night his daughter asked him why other kids' fathers drove nice cars while theirs came home smelling of engine grease and defeat. He didn't answer her that night. He just tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and walked back out into the cold to stare at the four bare walls that had swallowed his savings, his marriage, and almost his will to keep going. Nobody watching that scene could have guessed that in less than a month, 30 gleaming Aston Martins would roll through those same doors and change everything. If you believe in second chances, in quiet men who refuse to quit, and in kindness finding its way back to those who deserve it, hit like, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe, because this story is only getting started. Daniel had once been somebody. Not famous, not rich, but respected, the best mechanic in 3 counties, a man whose hands could diagnose an engine's pain just by listening to it idle. Then his wife left, taking half of everything and leaving him the garage, the debt, and their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. The divorce had gutted him financially. Clients drifted away when word spread that Carter's auto repair was going through some things. Banks stopped extending credit. His single-bay garage, once buzzing with 3 employees, was down to just him, 1 rusted lift, and a space heater that only worked if you hit it twice. He kept going for Lily. Every morning he pressed his one clean shirt, packed her lunch with a napkin note that said something small and silly to make her smile, and dropped her at school before opening the garage at 7. He took every job that came his way, oil changes, brake pads, a neighbor's lawnmower, anything that put food on the table. At night, after Lily was asleep, he sat under a single hanging bulb in the garage, doing the books over and over, hoping the numbers would somehow change if he stared hard enough. They never did. The turning point came on an unremarkable Tuesday, the kind of gray afternoon that blurs into every other gray afternoon of struggle. A sleek black SUV pulled up outside his garage, out of place among the cracked asphalt and faded signage of that end of town. Out stepped Victoria Sinclair, a name Daniel only knew from magazine covers and business headlines, a billionaire heiress who had inherited and multiplied an empire in automotive luxury holdings. She wasn't there for a repair. Her driver had simply taken a wrong turn, and she'd stepped out to stretch her legs while he corrected the route, phone in hand, barely looking up. When she did look up, her eyes swept over the sagging garage door, the single flickering light, the child's drawing taped crookedly to the office window. Lily had drawn her father as a superhero holding a wrench like a sword, and she let out a short, cutting laugh. She said, loud enough for Daniel to hear from where he stood wiping his hands on a rag, that she'd seen storage sheds bigger than his operation, and that it was almost sweet how some men still tried, in garages barely big enough for 1 car, to call themselves in the same industry as her company. She didn't say it with hatred. She said it the way people say cruel things when they've never once had to fight for anything, carelessly, the way you'd flick lint off a sleeve. Daniel didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that pride was a luxury he couldn't afford, and dignity meant something different to a man raising a daughter alone than it did to a woman who'd never known what it was to worry about rent. He simply nodded, said something polite about needing to get back to work, and went back inside. But Lily had been sitting on the office steps, swinging her legs, and she had heard every word. That night she asked her father if their garage really was too small and too sad for anyone to take seriously. Daniel knelt down, framed her small face in his greasy hands, and told her that some of the strongest things in the world came from the smallest places, a seed, a heartbeat, a single spark. He told her their garage might be small, but it was theirs, built with real work, and that mattered more than anything a stranger in an expensive car could say. Lily nodded, but Daniel lay awake that night with Victoria's laughter echoing in his skull, wondering if he really had given his daughter nothing but a small, sad dream. What Daniel didn't know was that Victoria's assistant, a sharp, observant young man named Marcus, had lingered a moment longer at the garage. He'd noticed the meticulous organization of Daniel's tools despite the shabby building, the way every wrench had its place, the way an old motorcycle in the corner had clearly been restored with painstaking love rather than money. Marcus had grown up around real mechanics before his career pivoted toward corporate life, and he recognized true skill when he saw it. He quietly photographed the motorcycle and, without telling Daniel, sent the photos along with a note to Victoria's restoration division, the part of her company that sought out independent talent to maintain her family's prized classic and luxury vehicle collection, a division she rarely paid attention to personally, trusting her directors to run it. 2 weeks passed in silence. Daniel assumed the humiliating encounter was over, filed away as one more small cruelty in a year full of them. Then, on a Thursday morning, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. It was Victoria's head of fleet operations, explaining that the company had reviewed footage and photographs of independent mechanics for an upcoming pilot restoration contract, and that Daniel Carter's name had risen to the top of a shortlist compiled by their scouting team. They needed someone to handle emergency maintenance and detailing for a private touring fleet passing through the region, 30 Aston Martins, part of an exclusive collectors' rally, all needing inspection, minor repairs, and immaculate presentation before the next leg of their journey. Every registered shop in the county had been contacted. Everyone had either lacked capacity or lacked the specific expertise needed for vehicles of that caliber. Daniel's name kept surfacing because of the quality of his past work, quietly documented in old customer reviews nobody at corporate had bothered deleting, and because of Marcus's photographs of that lovingly restored motorcycle. Daniel almost said no. His garage had one bay. One lift. Barely enough space to turn around in. But the money offered for the contract was more than he'd made in the past year combined, and more than that, something in him, the version of himself before the divorce, before the doubt, wanted to prove that small didn't mean insignificant. He said yes before he could talk himself out of it. What followed was chaos of the best kind. Trucks arrived with expandable canopy structures to extend his workspace. A logistics team helped him rent additional lifts and tools for the week. Neighbors he hadn't spoken to in months came by to see what the commotion was about, and some even offered to help hold equipment or fetch coffee, swept up in the strange electricity of watching this quiet, tired man suddenly matter. Lily stood on the steps of the office in her school uniform, eyes wide, watching gleaming cars worth more than houses roll one by one into the space where she used to do her homework on an overturned bucket. And then, on the second day of the job, a black SUV pulled up again. Victoria Sinclair stepped out, this time not glancing at her phone, but staring in open disbelief at the transformation of the garage she had mocked weeks earlier, now humming with organized activity, 30 exquisite vehicles parked in careful rows, and at the center of it all, Daniel Carter, moving between them with the calm authority of a man fully in his element. She had come, she admitted quietly to Marcus, expecting to find the pilot program had failed, expecting to swoop in and reassign the contract to a name-brand shop. Instead she found precision, care, and craftsmanship that made her own company's certified dealerships look clumsy by comparison. She didn't apologize with grand words. She wasn't that kind of woman. But she walked over to Daniel as he wiped grease from his hands on the same old rag, and she said, quietly enough that only he could hear, that she'd been wrong, that she had judged the size of his garage instead of the size of his skill, and that people who build real things in small spaces often build them better than people who inherit big ones. She offered him an ongoing partnership, not out of charity, but because her business simply couldn't afford to lose someone with his talent to anyone else. Daniel, for the first time in over a year, felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized had been clenched so tightly for so long. If this story moved something in you, if you've ever been underestimated, ever poured your whole heart into something small while the world laughed, ever kept going for someone you love even when it felt pointless, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that quiet perseverance is never wasted. Before we close this chapter, I want to ask you something. Comment below with one word that describes what you felt watching Daniel's story unfold: hope, pride, tears, whatever came to you first. I read every single one, and I promise you, they matter more than you know. In the months that followed, Daniel's garage doubled in size, then tripled, funded not by charity but by contracts earned through the same skill that had always been there, waiting for someone to notice. Lily no longer asked if their garage was too small, because she watched it grow, plank by plank, alongside her father's confidence. And sometimes, late in the evening, when the last engine had gone quiet and the lights dimmed over rows of cars far finer than anything he'd ever imagined touching, Daniel would think back to that woman's careless laughter, and instead of bitterness, he'd feel something close to gratitude, because sometimes the moment someone tries to make you feel small is the very moment life is preparing to make you unforgettable.